Hi, I'm Dr. Anna Baranowski, and I'm really pleased to have Mark Wolynn, who is author, speaker, I think almost savant in a very specific area. He wrote a book called It Didn't Start With You, and that's how inherited family trauma shapes who you are and how to end the cycle. And it gets really deeply into how the history and genetics gets woven into our lives today, and things that we could not even imagine have something to do with us actually came from previous generations. And like I usually say, how the past pours into the present. And usually I'm talking about this life, but you're talking about previous generations. So Mark, can you tell me how you came to your understanding of this work and what you're writing about?
My path was twofold. One, I had my own trauma. I lost the vision in one of my eyes and was told I would lose the vision in the other eye as well, which I'll tell that story. But also, I would see patients, clients that had symptoms that didn't seem to fit in the context of his or her life experience. I remember one of my first cases. Can I go into a very heavy case?
Absolutely, please. Yeah, people will be very interested.
Okay. It was, I worked a lot with self-injures, and self-injury is always a mystery anyway, but I learned in this particular case to connect the dots. So I worked with a woman. She was 24 years old, and she cut the first symptom, the first unexplained aspect of this particular style of self-injury is she would cut so deeply that she would almost bleed to death. Now, I worked with many cutters before, and the cutting didn't go this deeply, but each time she cut, she would hit a vessel, artery, vein, and almost bleed to death, and her parents would have to rush her to the hospital. So unusual. Clue number one, what makes her cut so deeply? And here was unusual clue number two. I asked her, I'll call her Sarah for the sake of the interview, Sarah, what are you thinking about right before you cut? And she said, I deserve to die. And here was a sentence which didn't fit in the context of her life experience, because I said, what did you do, Sarah? Did you cause an accident? Did take somebody's life accidentally? Did you leave somebody and your partner committed suicide? She goes, no, nothing like that. So back then, this is 20 some years ago, I just asked the normal questions. Tell me about your mom. Tell me about your dad. And she had a very loving relationship with her mom, where she was able to receive her mother's love and nurturance, and she was able to trust her mother's care, which isn't always the case. And then asked about her dad, and again, trust her father's care, receive his love. So I looked at the attachment. I figured something was hiding in the attachment. And she had a secure bond with her mother. And I had no clue where to go. This is 20 some years ago. So I thought, I'll ask a question. So I asked about the rest of her family, and then she dropped the bomb. I didn't know how to go here back then. And she said, well, my grandmother, my father's mother, was an alcoholic, and she was driving the car drunk. And my grandfather was in the passenger seat, and she crashed into a pole, and she lived. But my grandfather went through the glass, went through the windshield, got cut on the glass, and bled to death before the ambulance arrived. And in that moment, we learned two important connections that I hadn't previously considered back then. We learned that when she cut herself, it was an identification, a way to remember, an unconscious way to remember the grandfather whose name couldn't be spoken by the father because he missed his father so much. So each time he would think of his father, there'd be this terrible image of the way he died. So he was excluded, in a sense, the grandfather, an identification with the cutting. I too will almost bleed to death, Daddy, so you remember your father. And then this identification with the grandmother, who she was the real person who felt that she deserved to die. for taking the life of another, and in this case, the life of her beloved. And then I realized back then that, okay, we can't just look at the current life situation or even our current experience with our parents or just only our in utero experience. We've got to look at the family history. So that was direction one. And direction two, I lost my own vision. And I don't know if we have time to go into the personal
Oh,
story, but
please tell me, yes.
okay. Yeah. So 26 years ago, I lost the vision in one of my eyes, and I was diagnosed with a chronic form of retinopathy. And the doctors told me that the way it was progressing, I would likely lose the vision in the other eye as well. And I was pretty panicked because road signs I couldn't see, faces I couldn't see. There'd be a big black dot where the face would be. And I was told I was going to have the same thing in the other eye. So I went on a search. I ended up leaving my city, which was Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I went on a search for healing that literally took me halfway around the globe as far as Indonesia, where I studied with some very wise spiritual teachers who told me that I had to heal my relationship with my parents. They taught me some profound principles, and that was one. And I had no idea how I was going to heal my relationship with my parents. It was terribly broken. I didn't know at the time that, again, inherited family trouble, that's a good word for it, inherited family trauma stood in the way. Literally, the fact that each of my grandparents was orphaned in some way. Three of my grandparents lost their moms when they were babies or toddlers. And the fourth lost her dad when she was one, and ultimately her mom's attunement. So in essence, she loses her mom too. And this feeling of being broken from a mother's love, the terror, the anxiety of that I'll be abandoned, this is what rippled in my body. And this was the real cause of my vision loss. So I heeded the advice of the teachers. I rebuilt my relationship with my parents. And then my vision came back, which was, I didn't expect that. So I thought there was something to these principles. So I began combining the two things I learned about healing our relationship with our parents where possible, and looking beyond in the family history, beyond the first generation. And then I had the good fortune to study with Bert Hellinger and so on and so forth. And ultimately, I developed a method for healing the effects of inherited family trauma.
That is magnificent. And it actually works very well with a lot that you write about in your book. And I'm going to actually read a quote from your book that's so poignant. With the knowledge that emotions can be biologically communicated and the fact that 3 generations share the same biological environment of the womb, imagine this scenario, and this is from your book, so it's great. A month before your mother is born, your grandmother receives devastating news that her husband has been killed in an accident. With a new baby to prepare for and little space to grieve the loss, your grandmother would likely submerge her emotions into the body she now shares with her daughter, her unborn daughter, and her grandchild to come. Many years later, you and your mother would know something about the grief from a place deep inside of you, a place all 3 of you share. And this really hooks right in to the current science and in the world of epigenetics, and how that is really informing so much of, it seems to me, what you know through your personal life, and also what you stumbled upon with your insight and kind of the depth of the work you were doing with your clients. And it's like science is reinforcing what you learned, but you had actually come to this on your own. You also, in your work, talk about using language in a very precise way with very precise questions, and that's covered in your book as well. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. When a trauma happens, not only does it change the DNA and change the gene expression, which we know from science, it also leaves clues behind. Clues in the form of emotionally charged words, phrases, sentences, clues that if we learn to follow this trail, which is what I teach people to do, the language trail, the breadcrumb trail, that if we learn to follow this trail, it'll lead us into the family history the way it led my client, who I'll call Sarah. It'll lead us to an event in the family history or an early experience in utero or childhood. And we don't know which. We just have to follow the language. But the language is so particular that you can hear whether it's an early childhood trauma language or a family history language. I'll give you an example. If you hear words like "I'll be abandoned," "I'll be betrayed," "I'll be rejected," "I'll be annihilated," "I won't matter," "I won't exist," we can look early in utero and or early in childhood, and there's a good chance we'll find that language there. But when we hear sentences like, "I'll harm a child," I won't deserve to live," "I'll go crazy, they'll lock me up," "I'll do something terrible and I'll go to jail." When we hear sentences like this that many of us carry, we have to ask certain questions. In other words, we have to look into the family history to see who else might have had cause to feel the same way, because we could either be merged with a parent's experience or identified with someone other than the parents, a grandparent, an aunt, an uncle, an older sibling, a victim in the family, a perpetrator in the family, because they too now belong into our family genogram, traumagram, because of some victimization or perpetration. Now they have to be looked at too, because we can also have identifications with them. But when we but when we find the missing piece of the puzzle, Anna, it's like, and you place that piece into view, the whole picture now comes into view and finally gives us that context for why we feel the way we feel.
And there's something about making sense of what we know inherently, like deep within inside of ourselves, from that quote that I was saying. Once we can separate, this story is not my story, or it came from a certain place, it seems to create this sense of freedom or a freeing up from that historical past to this present moment.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And the issue is many of us don't think to make that link.
Mm-hmm.
For example, grandma becomes a widow at 30. Mom and dad start having affairs or breaking apart at 30. And at 30, we look at our partner and we think she or he doesn't do it for us anymore at 30, but we're not thinking to connect the stream. We rarely think to look backwards at this what I used to call, we share a 3-generational link, which embryologists have known for 100 years, because the female cell line stops dividing when mom, as you said earlier, is 5-month fetus in grandma's womb. And we're an egg in that womb. So when we talk about this 3 generations of shared experience, you betcha, it's there.
I like to use traumograms in the work that I do. I mean, people call them genograms, but because most of my work is with trauma survivors, I like to look, what has happened to your parents, your grandparents, maybe your great-grandparents, depending on what's happened in the generation tree, and then what's happening with you and what's happening with your children or your grandchildren. So we kind of see how this historical trauma can really pour into the present generation. And you're using genograms or traumograms in your work as well. So what are you finding out with that? How fruitful is that for you in your work?
So when I work with somebody individually, and now actually in my workshops, I hand out a traumagram. And I ask my workshop participants to listen to the events that other people talk about in their family, because it's like we're not all that different. It's likely this event also takes place somewhere in your family lineage. So not only do I get people's what I call the core sentence, the answer to their worst fear, which I write on top of their genogram, traumagram, but it's important to not only write this language down or really have it in your soul as you do the work with me, but also to start to look where this language percolates in the traumagram, and often it's all over. Because what I find is the trauma may have re-engineered with us. However, it's not the first variant of this trauma. It's very likely that this trauma existed in generations prior.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Now, I want to cover one more thing with you before we wrap up, and I'm so glad that we had the time to talk about this. But I know in your book you talk a lot about how important it is to reconnect with your family. But I think the reality is that sometimes people have very, very problematic, even dangerous relationships in their family of history. And I wonder, how do you address that? Do you tell people, oh yeah, just go back to those people anyways, even when there's danger, or do you handle it in a different way? And if you could just speak to that issue.
Yeah, absolutely. So I start off with never throw yourself in front of a moving train
Good.
until you've until you've developed an inner core where you have boundaries and you can breathe in your body and you know how to maintain the right distance and you don't shrink yourself and give yourself away and you're not defended and rigid. It doesn't help to go into real time and heal your relationship with your family if you're still reactive. So I teach people that sometimes we can never do it in real time.
Sometimes
Sometimes
it's just too dangerous.
it's impossible, and or parents aren't even around, or they're in jail, or what, or so we must at least in the intrinsic levels, in our inner landscape, find some way to receive something from where we came. So what we know from science now is whether we visualize a relationship or actually have the real relationship, the brain doesn't know the difference. The same regions of the brain, the same neurons become activated, light up. So I might have somebody visualize, let's say she doesn't feel comfortable healing her relationship with her mom. So I might have her put a photo of her mom over her left shoulder and create an inner dialogue, an inner visualization, an inner mindful meditation where she says, Mom, I know if you had received more from your mother, you would have given me more. But I know that didn't happen. So she imagines maybe an aspect or a higher aspect of her mother and says, Mom, could you meet me in sleep and help repair the bond that broke between us? And I'll be asleep, but I'll know it'll be happening. And Mom, can you teach me how to trust your love, how to receive it, how to let it in? Because I'm noticing in my relationships, I can't receive, I can't trust, I can't let love in. So in this meditation, in this visualization, in this prefrontal cortex state, we're pulling traction away from the midbrain, from the limbic brain that's always firing, not safe, not safe. And we're bringing engagement with this new experience. We're doing more than that. We're bringing blood flow, glucose, and oxygen out of the heavy midbrain. And we're bringing it to areas of the brain where we can integrate this relationship. And our brain can change. New neural pathways can develop. Um, we can stimulate the release of feel-good neurotransmitters like dopamine and serotonin by doing this. We can stimulate the release of feel-good hormones like estrogen or oxytocin. We can even change gene expression. Anna, this is the part that most turns me on. Our genes, the very genes involved in our stress response, can begin to function in a new and improved way when we engage the prefrontal cortex with a healing state like support, compassion, comfort, um, loving kindness, generosity, receiving something good. So the focus of my work, in fact, I spend the whole last third of the book teaching people how to enter these good states, these healing states that allow us to steal energy away from the limbic brain and bring it to the parts of the brain where our brains can change.
Thank you so much. That's such a good place to end what we're working on today. So I just want to remind people about your terrific book. I know that you're getting a lot of attention for the book because, well, it's clearly hitting the mark. Really looking at the epigenetics and how previous generations can impact you, looking at that core languaging through the lens of genograms, or any way that you can find it through the languaging that you use and the questions that you get access to, and then working with these new technologies to get people really grounded in a place where they can kind of harness all that good stuff to help them detangle what happened in previous generations and how they're doing today. I want to thank you so much again, Mark, for your time, and I hope I'll get a chance to sit with you and have a longer conversation about your excellent work. And I just want to thank you once again.
Thank you for having me, and I always enjoy talking with you.
Pleasure.
For more Ask Dr. Anna videos and information about post-traumatic growth and recovery, subscribe and like our YouTube videos at What is PTSD, or join us at previous video episodes in our playlist Ask Dr. Anna from the Traumatology Institute team.